That means you have to have one knuckle on the ground at all times while you're shooting.
Marbles have been entertaining kids for centuries.
So in the spring, we'd all dig out our marbles. If you didn't have any, you'd see if you could pawn a nickel or dime off of somebody and get some marbles.
The smooth, round shape, the sometimes colorful and intricate design, the small size perfect for a child's pocket and hands are what make these simple toys intriguing for kids and collectors alike.
Oh yeah, I played a lot. I had the knees wore out of my pants and I had a callus on my thumb where I shot. Yeah, I really loved it.
Ed Schubert fondly remembers waiting for the weather to break as a kid so he could get out and play.
We had the schoolyard, we had dirt there that was smooth, we could play. You'd make a circle, guys would throw their marbles in the circle, and we'd just shoot it.
Years later, he not only treasures those memories, but now, as a collector, he also appreciates the art and beauty that these tiny pieces of history hold.
We've got a box of Peltier feathered slags, and they're just absolutely beautiful.
These are called horizontal swirls. They're real unusual. There's no other marble in the world like them.
Marbles have been popular toys around the world for thousands of years, but originally they were handmade, and that meant not everyone could afford them.
There were toys, but they were so expensive because they were all handmade. Only the wealthiest families in the United States could afford to buy toys for their children. And the rest of the children, they made do with a rock or a discarded piece of rope or a stick. And there's a lot of fun you can have with those things, but not quite the same as having toys.
Michael Cohill is a historian of the Akron toy and marble industry and gives lectures on the topic throughout the region. He says in the 1800s, some children were lucky enough to buy a piece of candy with their own money, but most couldn't afford a toy. That all changed in 1884 when a newspaper man named Samuel Dyke started a marble factory on the site of an old lumberyard that had once been at Lock 3 of Ohio's canal system. Michael says it is the birthplace of the global toy industry.
They mass-produced the world's first toy here.
Samuel Dyke invented and patented the first device to mass-produce a toy, a clay marble, and it's relatively simple.
This is it. It's a piece of plaster with grooves in it. And the concept here is that you put a small billet of clay into each groove, and then you take a board that's covered in sackcloth, and you roll it over 1, 2, 3, and there you've got a dozen marbles. Now, this size is made to produce a 3/4 inch shooter. But to make a small target marble, the grooves would be much thinner. You could make up to 1,000 marbles an hour using this device. Before this, all marbles were made one at a time by hand, like this. And we've all done this. It's not easy to do. And it took a lot of practice to get good at it. But good at it means you could probably make 30 in an hour.
So according to Michael, because of this mass increase in production, the price dropped so low that you could buy a whole handful of marbles for just 1 penny.
And that made a huge difference in the lives of children, who for the very first time in world history could have a toy. All of them, everybody who could afford to get a penny could afford a toy.
Sam Dyke's invention allowed his factory to turn out 1 million marbles a day. It also made him very wealthy. And several years after he started his marble factory, the first of 34 other marble factories inspired by his success began to open up business in the greater Akron area.
And they made all types and styles of marbles, from earthenware, stoneware, handmade glass, hand-gathered, machine-made glass, fully automated machine-made glass marbles. They also made stone marbles, Akron Stone Marble Company.
Michael says the competition wouldn't necessarily impact Sam Dyke financially, but it made many other types of marbles available. The original clay marble became known as commies by the kids who loved playing with them, because they were the most common of all of the varieties. But according to Akron historian Dave Lieberth, in the beginning, there was only one material responsible for the Akron toy boom.
And the marble industry was an outgrowth of Akron's position in the world as one of the major producers of clay products. So we progressed from making marbles out of clay to marbles out of glass.
The marble market grew at a phenomenal rate. And there was no way for one factory or even a dozen factories to be able to fulfill all the wants for the marbles at that price especially. So with others making marbles, Sam Dyke decided that he needed to do something to basically instill prestige into his company.
So he brought a very famous glass master to Akron named James Harvey Layton.
They called him Harry. Harry Layton was third-generation American glass master. His grandfather had opened the Cambridge Glass Factory in Massachusetts, which is renowned as the first major glass factory in the United States. So Harry Layton comes to Akron, is Sam Dyke's guest. He shows him around. Sam explains to him, we need glass marbles. They make glass marbles in Germany. They're very expensive. What can you do?
So Harry Layton came up with a hand tool that allowed glass marbles to be made much faster than they were manufactured in Germany, in turn producing the first American glass marbles.
And they're beautiful. They were also rather expensive and intended only for the wealthiest families. A handmade glass marble cost a nickel in the 1890s, which was a lot of money. Seeing that a common wage back then was 25 cents for 10 hours.
The marbles were so beautiful and the process was so unique that there were a lot of people who wanted to invest in Harry Layton's marble factories.
And he got requests to do this from people in Navarre, Ohio, Medina, Ohio, Barberton, Ohio, Steubenville, Ohio, and he would go into these cities, he'd build a factory, he would train a workforce.
The businesses didn't last very long, but the marbles they produced were so treasured and well taken care of by their owners, they're still around today. Harry eventually even teamed up with a local drop-forward steel expert who was a mechanical engineer, and together they developed a process that creates a sphere.
You take a plastic material and you cause it to spin with a constantly changing axis, and right away it causes a sphere. And he built a number of different machines that would allow for you to make glass marbles, but then also to manufacture ball bearings. He could have been making chocolates and soap with his process too. Whatever the material, it would cause it to become spherical. And this was very important because, especially with the ball bearings, that allowed Mr. Ford to make automobiles, the Wright brothers to fly.
Such monumental pieces of history that all began with child's play. But marbles are only the beginning of the story.
There were gentlemen on the other side of town looking for new uses for rubber. And when they saw what Sam Dyke was doing at his marble factory in Akron, they thought, you know, if we could mass produce something out of rubber that kids like, we too could be fabulously wealthy. So they turned out the world's first mass-produced balloons, rubber balls, rubber duckies, rubber dollies, and rubber baby buggy bumpers.
In total, there have been almost 200 toy companies in the greater Akron area, most making rubber toys.
All the major rubber companies, Firestone, Goodyear, Goodrich, they all had a toy department. They made rubber balls then, basketballs then, balloons. There's still major toy companies in the greater Akron area today. Little Tyke, Step 2, Maple City Rubber is still the world's largest manufacturer of balloons. So it's a great toy making history, but it's also our future here. There's a great future in toy manufacturing in this area.
One of the key players in building up that toy making history was a Russian immigrant working at the Sun Rubber Company in Barberton, Ohio. He was one of the toy industry's great inventive geniuses.
And he patented and created some of the most important ways of manufacturing toys from rubber. His name was Dietrich Rempel.
Many people knew him by his initials, D.G. Rempel. And according to Michael, he patented rotocast molding, blow molding, and the first hollow-bodied rubber objects.
So he is the father of the rubber ducky, and he also patented the little squeaky that goes into all the little rubber toys.
That squeaky can still be found in a number of modern toys. And according to Dave, some manufacturers, like Little Tikes, are still using the rotocast process.
It's an injection of the polymer material, a rotating of the cast while the rubber is still warm so that it spreads evenly through the mold, and then out comes a molded vinyl product.
Rempel's creations were what Michael calls the Cadillac of rubber toys.
They're beautifully painted, and he had a story to go with each one, and he created them as characters. And all the other rubber toy companies started to do this too. And the city of Akron has developed a list of characters, children's characters, unique to the city, kind of like Hollywood has cartoon characters. Akron had its own rubber toy characters.
Soon after World War II, Dietrich Rempel started his own business, Enterprise Manufacturing, and it continued operating into the 1970s. Akron historian Dave Lieber says his interest in the region's toy industry arose because of his family's connection with some of the major companies.
Well, both my mother and father worked for the Cyberling Latex Company in the 1930s. My mom worked in the office and my dad worked in what at that time they called transportation. He was basically working in the trucking industry and preparing pallets for shipment on trucks across the country of Cyberling latex products.
His dad also later worked at Sun Rubber Company, which meant he was one of the lucky kids who benefited from the thriving toy industry.
I realized that unlike a lot of families, we had a lot of toys in the house that I played with, my brother played with, and that were made by Cyberling Latex and Sun Rubber. We had balls of all kinds. We had soccer balls and basketballs and footballs and play balls of different kinds. We had all kinds of small dolls that were brought home by my dad.
Not all kids were quite as lucky as Dave, but as the toy industry increased in Akron, more and more kids were playing with marbles. That resulted in marble tournaments popping up in the region and across the country. While Akron was making the marbles, Cleveland was promoting their play.
In the 1920s, Scripps Howard Syndicate decided that they would develop a newspaper promotion, and they introduced the concept of a national marbles tournament. There were about 25 in all, and each of those cities held a marbles tournament. And the way it worked is that it started with a school tournament. And the winner of a school tournament then went on to play the winners of about 7 or 8 other school tournaments. And the winners would eventually end up playing for the title of the city marble champion.
The marble playing competitors could eventually work their way up to the National Marble Tournament, which was the first children's organized sporting event in the United States.
In 1927, there was a little boy in Akron named Al Huey, and he won his school marbles tournament, went on to win the regional tournament, went on to win the Akron District Marbles Tournament, and represented the city at the Nationals.
He says a little girl named Gladys gave Al Huey a run for his money, but Al won.
And when he came home to Akron after winning the National Marbles Tournament, they had a parade, the biggest parade that there's ever been. It stretched from downtown Akron all the way to his home in Kenmore. And then that next weekend, every theater in the United States showed a film clip, the news of Al Huey winning the National Marbles Tournament in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And he was one of the most celebrated kids in the United States. And he went on to have a very good and long life here in Akron.
Of the 25 cities that were first to hold those tournaments, Akron is the only city that still holds one each year on the first Saturday in June.
The National Marbles Tournament continues to this day. It's no longer sponsored by newspapers, News organizations decided best not to be inventing their own news and to cover others' things, so they now have individual sponsors that help promote their tournaments. Just like here in Akron, we still carry on with the Akron District Marbles Tournament, and we have a lot of both girl and boy winners every year.
The marble industry was going so strong in the Akron region that despite the growing competition, in 1891, Sam Dyke had the largest toy company to operate in the United States during the 19th century. At the time, he gave the marble factory to his older brother. But unfortunately, in 1904, 13 years after his company was incorporated, the American Marble and Toy Manufacturing Company burned to the ground.
The next morning, every little child in Akron was down at the marble factory site, stuffing their pockets full of marbles, until the policeman came down to try and chase them away, but that was a losing battle. So the mayor went to city council. They had the old factory site declared a public nuisance. You couldn't have children rummaging around the burnout remains of an old factory. And since there was disputes about who owed what and who owned the property and who owned the marbles and toys that were spread out all over the acres down here, City Council just ordered the site buried. And in the process, we believe they buried upwards of 10 million marbles.
But the factory at the time of the fire wasn't only making marbles. It was also producing little penny toys, miniature replicas of things like jugs, boots, dogs, and cats that were made out of glazed stoneware. The factory site was excavated in 2001, and tens of thousands of marbles and penny toys were dug up. Michael was involved in the excavation and brings some of the best samples with him to showcase during lectures.
There are still millions of marbles buried out in the park. If you were to bring a shovel, which you're not allowed to do, but if you were to bring a shovel and dig a hole out in the park, you definitely would find marbles and little penny toys.
And one penny toy in particular stands out from the rest.
And we also discovered a Santa Claus. One of the penny toys was Santa Claus. Here he is. He's made and dressed in blue, and it's in the tradition of the old German Father Christmas, unlike the Santa Claus that we know and love today.
In the first half of the 19th century, many German immigrants came to Akron to work on building and operating the Ohio and Erie Canal. They brought their traditions with them, like that of a Santa Claus dressed in a long blue cloak with a white beard. The gift-giving element came from the 4th century Greek bishop St. Nicholas, who was known for being generous with gifts to the poor. But the blue robe and white beard originated with the pre-Christian German god named Odin, who is believed to have been the first influence of our image of Santa Claus. Our modern Santa dressed in red changed over time from influences like Clement Clark Moore's 1823 poem, A Visit from Santa Claus, now known as The Night Before Christmas, along with the popular Coca-Cola Company Christmas advertising campaign of the 1930s.
So when we first found him, we weren't really sure what he was, and there were some other people that were saying, it's a wizard or something. But we know now that he is the oldest three-dimensional image of a Santa Claus in existence. And we are very proud that he is still here. Everybody can come and visit him. And he gets a lot of attention, especially it's Christmas time.
The blue Santa is called a wishing Santa.
He fits perfectly in the palm of your hand, and even better in a smaller hand. But the concept was that you'd hold on to him and you'd wish out loud what you wanted for Christmas. And then you'd give it to your little sister, and she'd hold it and wish for her Christmas thing that she wanted Santa Claus to bring her. And it would go around the family to mom and dad, and everybody knew exactly what little ones wanted for Christmas. This was before there were such things as mall Santas. And it gave the mothers an opportunity. It's like, wait until you get home and you can wish on it, on the Santa, for your present. It was a good way to, you know, kind of diffuse the, oh, I want that, I want that, I want that. And it's like, be a good girl, you go home and wish on the Santa Claus, and we'll see what Santa Claus thinks.
For years, replicas of the Blue Santa have been sold at select shops around the region. Michael and his elves started making them in 2007, and each are made by hand and with love. One elf is Kathleen Varga, Michael's sister.
We made literally thousands.
In fact, she says they made 8,000 to 10,000 in one season alone.
You almost form an attachment to the Santa as you're working with them. When they're done, there is just this wonderful serene look, and of course their little hands are almost monkish. And what I love the absolute most is you can hold them in your hand, and they're almost like a giant worry bead.
I was recruited by the head elf, Kathleen, and she explained the project to me, and it sounded fascinating. And the more I learned about the history and how he had recreated this little guy from something he found in landfill was just so interesting, and how he came to life again through these molds and through these processes that were modern.
Sandy Hansen has always been an artist and also interested in history, so she says working on the Blue Santa was a perfect fit. And knowing they are still being used by kids today is an added bonus.
I think it's great that something from the past, and I think it would be even greater to know that they were all learning about the history of and not just given it as an object, but to learn about its history as a part of the city, as a part of the culture, and the importance that it had even as far back as when this little figure came from Europe as part of the culture of Christmas time.
The Wishing Santa is still enjoyed by kids today and is a reminder to all of us of the magic of Christmas. From Santa to marbles, Akron has played a pivotal role in shaping some of the greatest joys of childhood. Mass manufacturing a toy as simple as a marble opened up a world of possibility for children, not only in the region, but around the world.
We'd be hard-pressed to identify a toy capital today. Manufacture of small items has been so distributed all over the world, throughout Asia, for example, that it would be difficult to pinpoint one city. But for the 20th century, from about 1930 to about 1960, there's no question that Akron, Ohio was the toy capital of the world.
There are still major toy companies in the Akron region today, like Step 2, Little Tykes, Maple City Rubber Company, Headstrom Plastics, formerly Eagle Rubber Company, and Pioneer National Latex.
They provide at least 3,000 toy manufacturing jobs in the greater Akron area.
A future built on the strong foundation of the past, all beginning on this site at Lock 3 Park, where inventors thought of innovative ways to make toy making faster, more efficient, and more competitive, essentially giving birth to the world toy industry. And Michael Cohill continues to keep the history and traditions of toy making and marble playing alive by sharing these stories and artifacts from the site with children and adults year after year.
Perfect shot.
Before the factory opened in 1884, only the wealthiest families in the world could afford to buy toys for their children. But once the factory opened and they started mass producing toys, from that point forward, all children of the world could have toys. So to find Santa Claus, the oldest three-dimensional image of a Santa Claus, at the factory site, well, that's just proof positive. This is the site of the original North Pole.